Welcome to the Church of Thomas, 8/12/11, Tornado Passover. When I got back from Hawaii about 10 years ago, I set myself up in an apartment and proceeded to rebuild my life. And it was in Houston, and one of the things that I was wrestling with was the idea of becoming a minister. I had been fighting it for quite some time. But at this point, when this event happened, I actually had accepted the ministry. And unfortunately, in our version of Christianity, if we see somebody doing something that is unchristian, we actually say it. And I'm not talking about, you didn't bow 4 times before the altar and light this candle or that. We're talking basic not doing what Christians are supposed to do. Loving each other, accepting, not running away from lepers, all of these things. And I called some people out on their inability to practice what they preached. They were a group that has wandered a very far distance from God. But that's their choice. But I had a duty to mention it to them and point it out. Well, as a result, I created some spiritual enemies. These enemies practice voodoo and Santeria and several other groups. That was part of the problem, is that they weren't practicing Christianity or practicing a hybrid version of cherry picking a little bit from this tradition and a little bit from that tradition, but they're not mutually exclusive. They contradict each other in many ways, and that was part of what I had pointed out to them. It was near Easter, and there was a storm coming. And I felt evil around me. It's hard to describe. It's like an oppressive feeling. And I knew that this didn't feel like a normal storm. On the weather forecast, they were saying it was going to just be a thunderstorm. They didn't mention any tornado warnings. They didn't mention any unusual activity or circulation in the cloud cover. It was an unusual time, very early for the idea of a tornado. But I felt danger. And what I did is I started to pray. And it was with the fervor of a brand new minister that I was praying. No tarnish on that one. And I started asking for something very simple. First, that God's will be done. And second, that this could pass over me so that I could continue learning to be a minister. I mean, I was just starting. I barely had the knack of it. And the storm started raging around me. I was in an upper story of the apartment complex. And suddenly, the tree in front of the building started moving in ways that I did not expect from a tree to move during just a thunderstorm. I heard no lightning or thunder, but I did hear a freight train noise. And I had lived in Oklahoma, so I knew what that sound meant. And even though I knew that it wasn't predicted, this was something that my enemies had sent to me. When I felt it, I prayed even harder for it to pass over. When the storm had subsided, it was about 45 minutes later, I went outside and I realized that the tree in front of my building had been ripped of all its leaves. It had many broken limbs on it. And the apartments on either side of me, which thank God were empty, had their roofs injured. My roof was totally intact. The tornado had passed over me. And I knew it was a tornado, but there was a certain part of me that wanted some empirical evidence. So I started talking to the neighbors across the way in the building across the street. And they said, oh my God, yeah, there was this thing that came down out of the sky, and it was ripping up tiles and beams off of one side, and then it hopped over your apartment and went on the other side, and it tried to uproot that tree. And I said, oh, okay. So now I had a first-hand account of verification that it had been a tornado. Now the moral of the story is, when you do the right thing, when you speak out against injustice or unethical behavior or corruption, or someone who is not following what they are saying they want everyone else to do, you are going to make enemies, and it's okay. God will protect you. This is one of the rules about Christianity, is that when you speak the truth, you will be protected. Our quote of the day is Daniel 6:16 to 22. Now, obviously, the background on this was that the Jews were in exile. He became a major counselor, and there were a lot of jealous people in the bureaucrats around the king at that time. And they said, anyone who doesn't pray to our gods needs to be killed. And Daniel had gotten a dispensation over this at least once. And finally, they found a loophole and found him praying. And they said, oh, look, he's not praying to our gods. They seized him up, brought him to the king, who was very sad because he liked him as a counselor. And then he said, but I have to obey the laws that I wrote. I mean, I can't make exceptions, which I can understand. But God was supporting Daniel in his decision to do the right thing, which was to worship in the way that he chose to. So the quote is, so the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the rings of his nobles, so that the Daniel situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angels, and he shut the mouths of the lions, and they have not hurt me, because I have been found innocent in God's sight. Do the right thing. Even if you do draw enemies, you will be protected. God bless the whole world, no exceptions. Angel Eliza.